So heart disease in general is considered the #1 killer everywhere in the world. Heart attacks, angina, chest pain, coronary artery disease, strokes, heart failure. These are the things we as doctors, and I'm a cardiologist, of course, face every day. Usually the most common form of heart disease is actually coronary artery disease. So these are the arteries, as you can see here, of the heart, which supply the heart with oxygen, and that makes the heart pump. So if those arteries are blocked, if there's calcification which limit the blood supply to the heart, meaning caused by stenosis, coronary artery disease, that can lead to damage of the heart muscle. Some people have chest pains, others have a typical heart attack symptom, shortness of breath, and so on. So the risk factors for coronary artery disease are manifold, and there are several we really need to know. #1 is diabetes, high blood sugar, a big problem. More than 10 million people in the US suffer from diabetes. Diabetes does affect our blood vessels, the small vessels in our feet, the larger vessels in our heart, in our brains, in our kidneys. So diabetes leads to something what we call macrovasculopathy and microvasculopathy. So it affects the arteries in a way that they calcify and become tight, and that limits the blood supply to the organs. The second risk factor, very important to know, is high blood pressure, hypertension. And that's a big one because also there's probably more than 10 million people in the US diagnosed with high blood pressure. The biggest problem with high blood pressure is that many people have high blood pressure, but they don't know about it, or they don't take it serious enough, because high blood pressure doesn't hurt. We don't feel it. I don't know what my blood pressure is. You don't know what yours is right now. If the blood pressure is constantly too high, that affects the elasticity of our blood vessels. It makes the blood vessels stiff. They lose elasticity. If the blood vessels become stiff, then they develop something what we call endothelial dysfunction. And that leads subsequent to the calcification, the luminal reduction of the blood vessels, and that leads to heart disease, coronary artery disease, to calcifications in the arteries to the brain, to strokes, heart attacks, and so on. The third risk factor we have to be aware of is hyperlipidemia, or elevated cholesterol. Elevated cholesterol is a wide term for a different group of conditions. Some of them can be congenital, meaning people are born with this, but some of them, most of them, are actually of unknown cause. So if our bad cholesterol is too high, that also leads to vascular changes and calcification. Keep in mind that the plaques in the arteries are often compounded of calcium cholesterol plaques. So it's a deposition of cholesterol plaques in the arteries which limits the blood supply, leads to coronary artery disease, heart disease, strokes, etc. So the next risk factor, and that's something we can, of course, manipulate much easier, is our lifestyle. Smoking is a big one. Smoking, the inhalation of nicotine is actually a vasoconstrictor. So that makes the blood vessels tight. And chronic smoking, especially over a prolonged period of times, also leads to severe calcification of the arteries, and subsequent to that, heart attacks, blockages all over in all the arteries, kidneys, heart, the sexual organs, the brain, and so on. So that we can manipulate. There's a couple of other risk factors. One, we can't manipulate much because it's our own family history. So if your father, your mother, your grandparents have a history of heart disease or strokes, that puts you and me at higher risk for developing the same. So there is some congenital-genetic compound to it, which is not in all details explained, but a family history represents a significant risk factor for the development of heart disease in the future. If you want to train your heart, if you want to keep your blood vessels healthy, then we actually recommend a different type of exercise. And ideally, it is a combination of different types. So the first one is what is called HIIT, high intensity interval training. So what that means is if you exercise, you should have intermittent episodes of very high intensity. In other words, let's say you are on a treadmill. We'll walk slowly for 5 minutes, that's fine. But then you should really speed it up and sprint, even if it's for 20 seconds. And you should do that to an amount that you reach 80 to 90% of your target heart rate. The target heart rate is usually defined as 220 minus your age. So you want to interspear your slow walking with an episode of 20, maybe 30 seconds of a full power sprint. And if you do that, that's hard. 20 to 30 seconds to do that very hard you will be like this, you will be short of breath, but that's good for a short period of time to get your heart rate up to that 80 to 90%, followed by a low intensity resting phase where you let your target heart rate come down to maybe 50 to 60% of the maximal target. Okay, so not stopping, but then do a slow walk on the treadmill. Then after another 3 to 5 minutes, you do the same thing. You intersperse a sprint of 20 to 30 seconds, 3 to 5 minutes slow walking, and again. So if you do that over a total of 15 minutes with 3 short episodes of sprint of 20 to 30 seconds, that does more for your conditioning of the heart and the health of the elasticity of your blood vessels than 2 hours slow walking. So that kind of high intensity interval training, we recommend to do that twice a week, each time 15 minutes. In addition to that, I'm a big fan of weight training. Weight training in general has been shown to reduce the risk for cardiovascular events such as strokes and heart attacks by 70%. Weight training is important to improve the resistance capacity of the muscles, to build up our strength, to challenge our heart, to improve the blood perfusion into the skeletal system, including the muscles, and it prevents, especially for women, the development of osteoporosis and other problems with the skeletal system, especially the spine. So I suggest to do at least once a week a 20-minute episode of weight training, resistance training. And the third thing is what we call cardiac exercises, cardiovascular exercises, which usually is more a prolonged period of running, brisk walking, swimming, cycling, at a moderate intensity level. You should get a little short of breath doing that. It's also a nice social thing if you do it with your partners, with your family members, and so on. And the last thing, what I recommend is yoga. It helps you to learn to meditate, and it involves, of course, different stretching exercises, which are very important to improve the blood supply to all our body parts, our arms, our legs, our muscle groups. I usually recommend those I just mentioned. If you want to hear more about that, you just can Google my name, Dr. Ernst von Schwarz, or can check me out on YouTube, of course. We have usually some educational videos on YouTube posted about diet, about exercise, about nutritional supplements, but you can Google my name, you find the scientific publications.